It was a different pocket.
I've got the sound on, I'm gonna turn it off, so let me know when you're ready.
Oh, they were right up to do it. You're right. Well, I'll look her up.
Dan, you ready?
Just about.
Even Renee did not notice.
Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing. I think it sounds on. It sounds on-ish.
Let's see. Hello. Hello. Thank you for inviting Jesus into your home.
If you don't invite him, he'll just kick down the door.
Come in anyway. And can people at home hear us? Has the stream itself started? Okay.
All right. We ready to go?
I'm ready if you're ready.
Can Steve hear us? Has Steve responded?
I have not seen a note from Steve.
Do we want to get started anyway?
Let me make sure I am at RELC Hilliard.
What God ordains
Live
is
chat
good
replay.
indeed.
Why am I not getting today's?
Ba-da-da-da-da-da.
Okay.
Ba-da-da-da-da.
Steve sees us. Steve hears us.
All right.
Let us make it so.
All right. So let's get started then. Welcome everybody to live Q&A. This is Pastor and the Recovering Heretic. I am the pastor.
And I am the recovering heretic.
Yes. Welcome, Dan.
Welcome. Welcome to you.
Yes.
It's on this nice, wonderful, garden-soaking, rainy day.
Remember your baptisms.
The plants are loving it. Okay, today,
Mm-hmm.
as you preached on Genesis, so too would I like to Q&A on Genesis,
Okay.
and specifically talk about this Abraham dude.
Yep.
Madman of the desert.
Abe.
Get into that a little more, but first,
Yep.
carry over from last week.
Okay.
There was a question about, with the Samaritan, you had a priest go by
Mm-hmm.
and then a Levite go by.
Yep.
Who were the Levites?
So there are 12 tribes of Israel.
Mhm.
11 of them get land. The Levites do not get land.
Oh.
So they're and they do not get land because the Levites are, they help out in worship. So they start off as priests. They're the tribe of priests. By the time of the New Testament, the priests are of a particular line and family in the tribe of Levi.
Oh, so it's actually genealogical by that point.
Yeah, and then the Levites are assisting ministers might be the best role. They're people who help out in the temple. They're
Mhm.
worship leaders, they're music leaders, so by the time Jesus is telling the Good Samaritan story, their role is transitioned from just priests to they're more like all worship assistants in the temple,
Yeah.
basically.
So the assistant minister, the deacons,
Right.
the altar boys,
the music, the acolytes, right, all that
Okay.
stuff, is kind of
their thing.
their thing.
Okay.
So, yeah. So all priests are Levites, but not all Levites are priests,
Okay.
is how you want to think about it.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Karen, does that clear it up? All right,
Yep.
cool. And now on to today's topic.
Mm-hmm.
First is age.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that in the sermon that Abraham is 100 years old.
Yeah.
How old is Sarah? Steve wants to know.
It's a good question. They're both elderly, she's at least postmenopausal, so
Yeah,
uh
but we don't have any other clue than that. I mean,
no, not
because
really.
if Abraham was like 70 when they got married,
get
and she
the-
was 20.
Right. You get the feeling they're roughly the same age. Paul talks about their bodies being good as dead, and that kind of thing.
Paul was not kind to seniors.
Paul, yeah. Yeah, that's Paul. So you get the feeling they're roughly the same age, but it's hard to know,
Yeah.
So, yeah, we don't get Sarah's exact age. So,
Well, give us again the history. Did Abraham was supposed to go down and get someone else? Am I getting this confused? A wife, and fell in love with Sarah in the process? How did Sarah and Abraham meet?
so that's a Jacob story.
Jacob. Okay.
That's not a
okay.
right. We don't know. They're already married when we meet them in chapter 12.
Okay.
Yeah, in chapter 12, chapter 11 and 12, of Genesis, they're already married. So,
And how old are they at that point? Or how old is Abraham, since he's the only one?
again, it doesn't say his age then. He's like 70 in chapter 15 when he gets the promise again, so like they're older, but not super, they're not as old as they
So conceivably at that point, they're of childbearing age.
Well, the problem of childlessness is a problem from the very beginning,
Mhm.
so whether that means they are of childbearing age and they're barren, that's how it starts off. Sarah is barren. Or the story says Sarah is barren. Medically speaking, barrenness is actually passed on usually by the male, not the female, but that's a medical thing. They didn't know that.
Yeah. And we got a very patriarchal bent, so
Right.
I'm not going to blame the man.
Right. And barrenness is going to be a consistent problem. And again, that makes sense if it's a genetic trait, like the eyes, Rebecca will be barren, as will Rachel, at first. Like there's this, it's a persistent problem because barrenness, we talked about this in Genesis Bible study, plug. Barrenness is a metaphor for hopelessness, is how scripture thinks about it. So like actually a lot of women experience barrenness, Hannah in the Old Testament. This is Elizabeth, Mary, John the Baptist's mother's problem also,
Although it makes you wonder if there was some environmental pollutant
well, yeah,
in the promised land.
Right. Again, it's a metaphor for hopelessness, or maybe not a metaphor because it's a real condition, but the condition represents more than just I can't have a kid. It represents no future, because you need an heir for a future.
Yeah.
And so it represents not having a future,
Yeah. Well, I mean, further down or earlier, Time and I have a very difficult relationship, but it mentions, the obsession with having that male heir in part for Abraham because everything would go to basically his head butler.
Yeah.
Was that a tradition too, that if
We
you had
have
no heir, it went to your
We have
chief
no,
servant?
Yeah, we have no idea. It's probably an ancient. Some of this stuff in the Abraham narrative is like the oldest pieces of script of the Old Testament. So like there are things like that where it's like I don't know what 2000 BC
Yeah.
inheritance customs were
The culture itself was so far.
right in so like it's kind of like maybe you're just kind of. It seems to be that whatever's the inheritance issue is that the head slave gets the stuff if there's no child.
Yeah.
So maybe I don't know.
So at least as far as Abraham was concerned,
Right,
it does not stay with his family.
right.
Now, would that have been true even of his child with Hagar?
Well, there's an issue.
Because it seems like they at least have a genetic.
Yeah,
it's-
Hagar's a
it's-
concubine.
Yeah.
And so this is the origin still to this day of the Arab Jew conflict. Because Arabs trace their lineage through Ishmael. So the argument goes,
We're actually the firstborn.
right, we're actually older, which is true, he is.
Uh-huh.
Versus the other argument is son of a wife takes precedence over son of a concubine, which could also be true. Like they're both, they're a little murky, so that's a fight as old as time. Our Bible says, Isaac is the promised child.
Yeah.
If you read the Quran, it says something different.
But it actually stems back that far.
Yes.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So let's get back. You said we don't know a lot. What do we know about? Do we know anything about Ur? Any of the customs?
It's a real place. It's one of the first cities in human history, actually.
Yeah. In fact, there's a game we get out of it. So
there is.
yeah. Oh, I'll tell you about that
Yeah,
in
you
one of
gotta
our
tell me
gaming
about
talks.
it.
But yeah, there's a game we still play today that actually originated in Ur.
Backgammon, right?
It's related to backgammon.
Okay.
But yeah.
Yeah. I know what you're talking. So it's one of the first human cities. It's in Iraq. It's Ur of the Chaldeans. Chaldeans are real people. They still exist today, actually. There's a lot of them in Detroit. If you go, they're pre-Arab Iraqis, basically, before the Arab migrations. They're non-Arab Iraqis. They're actually also vehemently Catholic.
Really?
Yeah, they are hardcore Catholics.
Wow. I had no
So they're
idea.
Christian Iraqis.
But their roots actually go back to being essentially the first people to settle that.
Yep, they are. Yep, they're the original or close to the, maybe not the original, but close to the original.
Yeah.
A lot of them aren't in Iraq anymore since the Iraq invasion. A lot of them are in the U.S. We accepted quite a few as refugees. So Detroit, Michigan, a lot of that area has a lot of that settlement.
So technically, Abraham was Chaldean.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. Yes. And so past that, we don't know a lot. There's not a lot that can be verified historically. It's not like we have an archaeological dig that's like, this was Abraham, trying to find one family in Bronze Age. You're searching for one family in the Bronze Age is kind of a lost cause.
Well, especially one that was not a royal family, so you don't have ornate tombs.
You don't have tombs. You don't have, you're talking about what's at best a sort of wealthy merchant. Like he's probably a caravaner. That's what it kind of sounds like. That.
So he was into the import-export business.
Yeah, well, that's what it sounds like. He's mobile. He's very mobile. He's got a lot of herds with him. So it sounds like he's some combination traveling caravan, wandering herds kind of thing.
Yeah. Either way, if he's got herds, he would have been wealthy.
Right. He's fairly wealthy. Yeah, he's fairly wealthy. Says Scripture. Has enough people attached to him that he can gather like a small armed band of like a small army. You
Mhm.
know, like there's a story about how his brother gets captured, or his brother-in-law or whoever Lot is, nephew, some relation gets captured, and he says he gathers the men of his household, and it's a couple hundred, you know. So he's got enough people around him. He's able to field kind of like a company-sized unit,
Yeah.
you know, and conducts a battle that way, you know. So
Yeah. So we're not talking about just some wandering hermit type.
you're not talking about a hermit. He is a wanderer, and Scripture's pretty clear on that. God even says it to the people of Israel at one point. He says, "Your ancestor was a wandering Aramean. Don't think so highly of yourselves." You know?
So being a wanderer was not considered a good high class.
Yeah, or right in general, no.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it still isn't today, right? You know, migratory populations are never looked on with great love.
Yeah.
You know, so right. So he's mobile. He's a wanderer. You know, yeah.
Now, are there any non-canonical stories of Abraham that kind of
Probably
flesh out a little
are,
bit?
but I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not as well familiar. Again, there is. I mean, there not probably there is because there's first of all the Quran has whole sections devoted to him. You know, from Islam's perspective,
Mhm.
there's all sorts of midrash material from Jewish tradition on Abraham. I just don't know it.
Yeah.
You know, so and then there's the shared story in the Genesis narrative.
Mhm.
You know.
Well, was getting to the Genesis narrative. Well, actually, delving out because Steve has a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
He one time heard that sheep owners were called wanderers. Does that apply here?
I don't know about sheep owners specifically, but herdsmen in general wandered. You know, our modern world where it's a new thing where ranchers are tied down to a specific plot.
Yeah.
You know, even in modern American ranching history, like it used to be like thousands of those herds would just kind of go to and fro.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I mean, that's not even 100 years,
Right.
really. I mean, the shootout at the OK Corral, which is so famous, ultimately was a conflict between the old school
Right.
cattlemen who just wanted open access to all land.
Right.
And the more modern school of like, no, we're property owners and you can't put your cattle on our property.
Right. And that's a conflict going back. That is also a conflict going back as old as time, you know. So sheep and cattle herders have that problem. This is why shepherds aren't regarded well and why wandering Arameans with flocks aren't regarded well, you know, is because they wander on your property, you know, and suddenly all your grass is gone because the sheep ate everything or the cows ate everything. It's like, what you doing? That was my grass. That was my lawn. You know,
And you paid me nothing for that.
right? Yeah. So that's a conflict going back as old as time.
Well, back to oldest time.
Mm-hmm.
Abraham is functionally the father of the three major monotheistic religions.
Yep.
Was that the very first incidence of monotheism? Or do we have any indication there was any kind of monotheistic belief before Abraham?
Okay, big term.
Okay.
Strict theoretical monotheism. A philosophical concept that not only is there one true God, but there is only one God, period, end of story.
Yeah.
You know, no other gods exist.
And that comes after Abraham.
Yeah,
right?
that's a concept that takes a while to develop, you know. So we call that strict theoretical monotheism. You know, that not only are the pagan gods wrong, but they don't exist. You know, they're just stones and statues.
Mm-hmm.
That's a concept that rises out of it starts developing in many places, but in the Israelite narrative, it starts developing in exile.
Oh, so it wasn't until the exile that even.
Yeah, you can tell in Isaiah that they're starting to transition that way. and it's their response to, you've got a problem in Scripture of, and you can tell what the theological problem is. Normally, when you lost a battle, your God lost. So Israel loses to the Babylonians. Normal theological belief would dictate that that meant Yahweh and Marduk fought, and Yahweh lost, and that's why we lost. And the Jews kind of have this. They're trying to work out this theological problem. The conclusion they come to is not that we lost, but there just are no other gods, other than ours. And so Yahweh did it, because the Babylonian God isn't real. That's kind of their train of thought. They do this, they take option B rather than normal option A. The Israelites were probably what we call, again, this term will not be on the test. The Israelites were what we call henotheists. And henotheists believe that all the other gods are real, just that their God is number one. And so Abraham's probably in this category
Of henotheists.
Of henotheist. He probably is not what we would call today a strict theoretical monotheist. He probably acknowledges that other gods exist. He just thinks the only one who's made him a deal is the one who's come to him.
And so that's really the bottom line for him, is that this one made a deal with me.
In many ways, yeah.
Because he would have come out, right? I mean, growing up, being raised, he would have believed in a pantheon.
Yeah, he probably would have, right, pantheon. But the only one who made him a promise was this one, and that's kind of where it begins.
Now, is this one, at least in Abraham's eyes, I don't want to come across as too heretical.
Yeah.
But in Abraham's eyes, would this God have been based on one of the Ur gods? Like, would it have been the sky god of the Ur pantheon?
Maybe. It's clear that the Israelites, when they move into Canaan, and the Canaanites have a god named El-Anon, or Elion or something like which, if that's one of the older names of God, and that's an appropriated Canaanite title. So, he probably would have worked this into that kind of framework. Yeah. I mean, I don't know which one it would be, but yes, he would probably, just how people work, right? Probably would have been like, okay, where do you fit in the library of gods that I know? Where do you fit in the registration?
This is my paradigm, so how are you?
Right. Where do you, and he doesn't tell him his name, which is the trick, right? And that's a point that the Old Testament actually makes, that Moses is the first person to know the true name of God, and so since he didn't know God's true name, it was kind of like, well, I'll fit you where I fit you, kind of thing, Yeah.
Well, Steve says this is reminiscent to him of the Egyptian god Ra. There was that one pharaoh that tried to make Ra the only god.
Yes.
And,
right. So
it
didn't work.
Didn't play well.
Right. And so there's a pharaoh in Middle Kingdom Egypt called I think it's Middle Kingdom, called Akhenaten, and he tries and replaces polytheism with strict theoretical monotheism, and it's a little too early for that still, and people don't like it, especially since there's money involved in Egypt. So, and so, right.
And money is the ultimate god.
Money is the ultimate god, right? So, right, similar thing actually, and you start seeing this concept kind of develop in many places. Often it's that around like solar worship, sun worship. This is where Constantine begins his kind of faith journey too. He's a sun worshiper. Sol Invictus is the sun god, right? Who's the one god? So
it almost sounds like one of those moments in cultural history where humanity in general was ready to develop this concept.
Yeah, right. And we do see that, there is kind of a cultural moment where people start, it's all around the same time, people start kind of Greeks start developing it as philosophy. So this is actually where the idea of the logos, the uncreated word, comes out of Greek philosophy during the same period. That there's this divine word, that logic, if you will, that permeates all creation. So Greek philosophers start toying with that idea. The Israelites are toying with it. The Egyptians have their kind of run with it.
Yeah.
So right, there is kind of there's a moment there, that people are kind of ready for it.
And this is the one that had staying power. So.
Well, right, and theologically we call that, again, term that's not on the test. We call it progressive revelation. That God accommodates God's self to people where they're at. And so if you're ever wondering, well, why didn't God
just from the outset?
Just from the outside, it's like, well, people weren't ready for it, and so God always accommodates people, to where they're at.
Yeah.
And progressively, we get this revelation of who God is.
And that brings up some of the inconsistencies in the Bible, right? There's the Bible really needed a continuity editor.
Yeah, right, and
because you go back to Adam and Eve, and that paints it as from the very get-go, everybody knew there was just the one God. But obviously not true, because even later in the Bible itself, it's like, no, we all believed in multiple gods.
Right. And so, and some of those, and part of that is some of those stories are edited by somebody in that Babylonian captivity. Like Genesis 1, the opening chapter, is edited by a guy we call the priest. And the priest is writing in the Babylonian exile. That's when he's doing his editing. So like he's wrestling with this, he's on board with this theoretical monotheism idea. So,
but it does seem to have Babylonian influences from Babylonian mythology in some aspects. Is that why? Because
they're responding to Babylonian influence. They're trying to answer Babylon's own propaganda, I guess I would say. So if it sounds like it's fitting into a Babylonian, like it's because they're trying to answer Babylon's story.
Yeah, because that's where they are.
Right, because that's where they are. Yeah. But so like he's editing much later, and so like because he's editing later, pieces will sound like they're on board with this theoretical monotheism. That's because the editor came along much later and did his work.
Yeah, he retroed.
Yes,
retrofit.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
What about?
Again, none of this makes a difference to your salvation, or. By the way, like,
well, that's another. There was a little bit of a continuity thing today.
Yeah, don't think I got to know what strict theoretical monotheism to be saved by Jesus Christ. Please don't think that.
No, yes, you do. Study hard.
Yeah, you're saved by your faith in Jesus Christ. That's simple.
Yeah. Today's psalm seemed an odd psalm to pick for a Lutheran congregation because it's very Acts righteousness oriented.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say I had a colleague kind of asked, because we were talking about the Genesis text, like, because part of the call is to wait. Isaac doesn't get born until chapter 23, or something like that. So like,
so even for us as readers, it's a long time.
It's a ways still, until he gets born. It's a full calendar year, says God, right? Still, by the time I come back, so it takes a while, both narratively and literal time-wise, and so part of the call is to wait on God's good promises, And one of my colleagues was like, "Well, what do I say to the people who, why are we still waiting?" And I don't know why. I don't have an answer to that one, but the psalm is kind of like, what do we do in the meantime? Like in the meantime, don't take bribes, don't lend money at interest, don't lie, keep your word,
things to do while you wait.
Right. While you wait, you should do these things, and that's where that psalm comes out of.
Now, one of the things that I found, another possible inconsistency anyway, is that by the time of Moses, there's this whole concept that if you actually look directly at God, you die, or other bad things. But Abraham, God just pops in, a couple of companions, and Abraham does the typical, what we now associate as Arab culture, the cultural history of hospitality, but obviously it was just generally around there this whole time.
It's an honor-shame culture.
So he goes down, he greets them like he would any strangers, and he's looking at them, and he doesn't seem to have a clue at least initially, that he's dealing with this God that made him the promise.
Yeah.
So why is God just like another guy here, but down the road by the time of Moses, it's like, no, if you just take a glance at him, you're a goner.
There's a difference between like God and whatever kind of just a guy form he's in, and God in full
Playing skee ball in the jersey.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. I was hoping you would get that. Between that and like God in his full glory, I guess I would say, which is what Moses sees.
So this is like restrained God image mask.
This is God, I
God
guess.
cosplaying.
I guess I would say this is God. This is almost like a precursor to Jesus. It's God incarnate, in some human form,
But you're not seeing everything.
Yeah, you're not seeing, again, the full glory of the Lord, which is, yes, something that will kill you, and so Moses.
Yeah, Moses gets sunburned really bad just
Right,
being around it.
Right, just being near it, Moses gets, it's like radiation, right? He's starting to glow in the dark, and God says, well, you can see my backside, you can't look at it full on, you'll die, but you can catch my back,
And all you got is radiation poisoning.
Yeah, right. And so, right, and people get visions of the temple, Isaiah opens up his ministry with a vision of the throne room of heaven, but it's really just God's footstool. You're just looking at the bottom of the whole thing, right? And even that, Isaiah's initial response is, "Woe is me! I'm going to die. I'm in such a holy place." It's kind of, your holiness will kill me.
Yeah. Even if all I see is the cuticle on your left pinky toe.
Right. Woe is me.
Well, we've only got about a minute left.
Okay.
So I want to end on a semi-fun note.
Okay.
But there's a difference, and I don't know if this tells us where Sarah's head is at, or if this is mistranslation in action.
Yeah.
But I love the fact that Abraham's all concerned about being too old to have a son with Sarah. And Sarah's response is, no, I'm too old to have pleasure.
Yeah.
And the way they're looking at the same act.
Right. It's hard to know what's going on there.
Yeah. I mean, is it a mistranslation, or does Sarah actually say, I'm too old to have pleasure?
I haven't looked at what the word is there.
Uh-huh.
That's not the part I have focused on. There's an important issue here to be raised about Sarah, that it's not quite clear if Abraham's told Sarah this entire time. There's actually no point in the story where Abraham literally goes to Sarah.
It says, this dude made a promise to me.
Right, and says, God made a promise.
Yeah.
So this might be, there's a way to read the whole Genesis narrative, which is the way a lot of women theologians read it, which is that this is actually the first time Sarah's hearing it.
And that's why she's eavesdropping at the tent flap?
Well, that would have been normal. She's supposed to be behind the tent flap in a patriarchal society. But that's why she laughs. It's because this is actually her first. And if you believe that, that colors kind of the whole Hagar story. That's a solution to a problem. She doesn't know about the promise.
So in her mind,
right,
he's just having a fling with someone else.
Well, it's her idea at first, but it's her idea to solve a problem that she knows is a problem. But she might not be aware of the promise. Abraham might not have.
And that's why she comes up with a solution.
Right.
She doesn't know there's already supposed to be one.
Right. Abraham might not have told her,
So the typical accusation of the husband never telling the wife everything.
Yeah, well, think about
also
how
as old as time.
Think about how often that happens in our world, right?
Yeah.
And so.
No, Renee would always get on me. So, how was work today? It was good.
Right.
And that's it,
Right. Well, and like the first two times God comes to Abraham, it's in a dream, or in some way like that. So it's not an improbable reading of the whole narrative, So don't be too hard on Sarah, because this might be the first time she's hearing it out of God's own mouth herself, you know.
So Abraham just was not a communicator. Okay, we can conclude on that.
Yes,
note.
yes. Communicate with your wife.
It avoids all kinds of problems.
Right, all kinds of drama.
Cool. Well, thank you as always.
Yeah, thank you.
And a reminder to everybody, we will be off next week, right?
Next week was the week we were off. That was it.
Yes. So we're off next week, but the week after we're back. So you got 2 weeks to come up with awesome questions.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Peace.